Dear all participants, we're about to begin, so please turn on your cameras, um, take a seat, and make yourself comfortable. Good morning to all of the participants. Welcome back to the second day of Lex Proficia 2021 summer course. My name is Daniel Kando, and I will be your host for today. For today's online class, we will hear a special presentation by a representative of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees of Indonesia, Mr. Isa Somawijaya, SILLM. The interesting topic that will be brought today is regarding refugee protection in Indonesia, where this session will be moderated by Dr. Adia Paramita Prabandari. Therefore, before we begin, I would like to introduce our moderator based on her CV. Our moderator this morning is Dr. Adia Paramita Prabandari. She received her bachelor's degree in Universitas Diponegoro, her master's degree in University of Wisconsin, and her doctoral degree in Universitas 11 Maret. Currently, Dr. Adia is a lecturer here in the Faculty of Law, Universitas Diponegoro, teaching public international law. Dr. Adia, the platform is yours.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. The honorable speaker, Mr. Isa Sumawijaya, and also fellow students, ladies and gentlemen. Here we come again. Good morning. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We meet again at the second day of the summer course, Lex Proficia 2021. Okay, I will be your moderator today in this morning session and also at the afternoon session. Okay, at this morning session, we will have speech from Mr. Isa Sumawijaya, SHLLM, entitled Refugee Protection in Indonesia, whom I believe will enrich and also give our new knowledge on this matter. Okay, hello, Mas Isa. I usually call him Mas Isa in our project with UNHCR. How are you today, Mas Isa?
Hello, Dr. Adia. I'm fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm good too. Okay, thank you for joining us today. I will read the short curriculum vitae of Mas Isa. Okay, Mr. Isa Sumawijaya completed his Bachelor of Law degree at Faculty of Law, Universitas Padjadjaran in 2005, and then continued his Master at School of Law, University of Essex, and graduated in 2009. He joined the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees and has held various assignments there, such as the Protection Associate in Jakarta base, January 2010 to November 2010, and then at Yemen as Associate Refugee Status Determination Officer, and then at Egypt as Associate Resettlement Officer, and then at Iraq, Associate Refugee Status Determination Officer, then in Pakistan for about 4 hours, also as Associate Refugee Status Determination Officer. Then he moved to Turkey in Ankara in 2017 to 2008 as a refugee status determination expert. And in July 2018, he moved back to Jakarta, Indonesia, and being as assistant protection officer until now. Wow, what an experience traveling around the world. And I'm sure his experience and also his expertise will enrich our knowledge on, especially on the refugee protection. Okay, due to the limited of time, Mas Isa would have approximately 60 minutes, Mas Isa, to deliver your speech, and also we will follow by a discussion session after the speech. And all the participants, if you want to ask any question, you can write it in the chat column, and don't forget to mention your name and origin of your program. Okay. Without any further ado, I would like to welcome Mas Isa, Mr. Isa Sumawijaya. Mas Isa, the platform is yours.
Thank you so much, Ibu Adia, and a very good morning to everyone. So thanks again to Universitas Diponegoro for giving this opportunity for UNHCR to give a presentation about how the refugees are protected in Indonesia. And I'm also very pleased to know that the participants are also coming from different countries, including from Southeast Asia, because there are so many similarities as well when it comes to how the refugees are being protected in the regional context. And the fact that most countries in Southeast Asia, including Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, that we maintain our position not to ratify the 1951 convention, also the 1967 protocol. So I think I'm really looking forward to also for the discussion with the participants, especially from the other Southeast Asian countries. So I would like to ask for your approval if I could share my screen, or you will be the one sharing my presentation.
You may share your screen, Asisa.
Okay, thank you so much, Ibu Adia. Yeah, just wanted to check whether everyone can see my PowerPoint presentation on their screen.
It's good.
Yeah?
Yep.
Okay, so thanks again for the opportunity. So I'm sure that many of you are already aware about refugee issues in the context of Southeast Asia, Indonesia, and even in the bigger regional context that includes also Australia and beyond. And probably some of you also have taken relevant modules or courses in your school, your university about human rights law or international refugee law. So my next two slides just consider as refresher, because for those of you who are not that familiar, I hope that the next two slides will be quite useful for you. So I think let's just start with the definition of refugee as per the Article 1A of the 1951 Convention. Who can be considered as a refugee? What are the elements that needs to be fulfilled for someone to be qualified for refugee status? I think the first of all, as you may all know, that he or she needs to be outside their country of origin, because there is another terminology for those who may fled their village, their city, or their island to another island, city, or village, but within the same territory of the country. The reasons could be similar: sectarian conflict, persecution, violence, as well as natural disasters. But still, they still found refuge within their own country. For those people, we call them IDPs, as you may also be aware, or the internally displaced persons. But once they actually cross the border to seek international protection in other country, so then we call them asylum seekers. So this is one of the requirements that needs to be fulfilled for someone to be qualified as a asylum seeker, which then eventually they will be also eligible for refugee status. And the second element is they must have a well-founded fear of persecution. And the persecution also needs to be based on one of the convention grounds as elaborated by the 1951 convention. They are race, religion, nationality, membership of particular social group, and political opinion. And they are unable, or owing to such fear, is unwilling to avail themselves of the protection of that country. So I hope that this definition is well understood by all the participants, because this is very important. And this definition somehow also distinguishes refugees from other displaced people, including those who actually left their countries seeking better life opportunities in other countries. So there is more economic motive in their departure to other country. And I think for this category of people, usually we call them migrant workers. But also, please keep in mind that sometimes also migrants could also be refugees, because many actually, when you actually talk to them and get the information why they fled their country, you may hear that they just wanted to get better jobs in other country. But then when you dig deep about the reason why they couldn't get like a better job in their country, you will actually find different reasons that include discrimination, because some countries do not give equal opportunity for minority groups, whether those because of religious identity or because of racial or ethnic identity, that at the end could be amount to persecution and then compel these people to leave to other country to find better jobs opportunities. But in fact, it was actually a persecution. So this is very important to share this, because in UNHCR, especially in the non-state party to the 1951 convention, we conduct refugee status determination, where we interview asylum seekers just to collect information about the reason why they fled their country of origin. Yeah. Okay, my next slide is about stateless people. So many of you probably not really aware that UNHCR also has a statelessness mandate. So there is another convention that deals with statelessness issue, the 1954 convention, as well as the 1961 convention regarding reduction of statelessness. Some refugees are stateless, but not all refugees are stateless. I think probably the most known stateless refugees, at least in the context of Southeast Asia, is the Rohingyas. So they are refugees, but they also are stateless because of their religious identity and ethnic identity. Then they are being deprived to right of citizenship in their country of origin. So who is stateless then? So as you can see on your screen, this is based on the convention. A stateless person is someone who is not considered as a national by any state under operation of its law. And although it also mentions in the bottom that there's an estimated number of stateless people in Southeast Asia, around 1.4 million, but most countries in Southeast Asia, basically, we do not know how many stateless people in our country, especially in the context of in situ statelessness, meaning that those people who are stateless in their own country. So this is the reason that we are so happy that we are collaborating with Universitas Diponegoro for the statelessness project that we are conducting baseline study just to understand a little bit more about statelessness situation in Indonesia, including people living in border areas to Malaysia, to the Philippines, as well as the Papua New Guinea. So I'm sure that the participants from Malaysia also are pretty much aware about the Sabah situation, where there is a concern that many stateless people living there, including Indonesian workers who became undocumented, but then they have been living there basically not having any affiliation to any country that include Indonesia or Malaysia as well. And there are so many regional actors involving these countries trying to know a little bit more about the situation and address the situation. And last year, there was this agreement between three national human rights institutions, Komnas HAM, Suhakam, as well as the National Human Rights in the Philippines, about the Sabah statelessness issue, that we hope that we are going to see more reports about the situation in Sabah. So anyway, what UNHCR is doing in implementing its statelessness mandate in the Indonesian context, at least, that we are advocating for access to birth registration and birth certificates for all children, including, of course, the marginalized groups like the asylum seekers, refugees, but as well as the local children who may be living in remote areas, in remote islands that are far away from infrastructure for them to have their birth certificates. So that's also one of the focuses that UNHCR Indonesia is doing. But I think once UNDIP will then be completing the statelessness project, it will help UNHCR Indonesia to do the programming for the next years in regard to statelessness, that we hope that we can cover what UNHCR is expected when it comes to response to statelessness. As you can see on your screen, identification, prevention, reduction, and protection. While in the Indonesian context, we are still on the first stage, which is identification. Yeah, okay, now back to the other persons of concern to UNHCR, which is refugees and asylum seekers. And I'm just showing you the global trend. This report was published by UNHCR in June 2021 about the statistic of how many displaced people by end of 2020. So we have around 82 million displaced people all around the world, which is very sad reality. And among those 80 million, 26 millions of them are refugees. And 20 million out of 26 million are under UNHCR's mandate, while around almost 6 million, they are Palestinian refugees that they are protected by other UN agency that is called UNRWA. But UNRWA is only operating in different Middle Eastern countries. It's not really operating outside the Middle East, meaning that if the Palestinians seeking asylum outside the Middle East, they will also be benefited from assistance program provided by UNHCR, and they will be also qualified for refugees under the Article 1A of the 1951 Convention. So out of these 20 million refugees under UNHCR's mandate, where do they live? Where they are being accommodated? As you can see also on your screen, Turkey is the largest hosting country for the refugees. 3.7 million refugees living in Turkey, and 3 million of them are Syrians because Turkey shares land border with Syria, while 700,000 more, they are coming from different parts of the world that include Iran, Afghanistan, Iraq, and different other nationalities. And we have Colombia in South America also hosting more than 1.7 million. We have Pakistan, 1.4 million, Uganda, 1.4 million, and Germany. And in fact, Germany is the only developed country that actually hosting large number of refugees. And 86% of global refugee population is actually hosted or being accommodated by developing countries, third world countries, poor countries, whatever the terminology suits you. But it also shows that developing countries are more generous when it comes to hosting the refugees compared to the developed nations. Okay, so how about Indonesia? How many refugees in Indonesia? It's not much. As you can see, this is the statistic that we have as per end of June 2021. We have just 13,416 individuals registered with UNHCR. And most of them are adults, 71%, but we also have 27% children and around 2% elderly. And among the children that mentioned here, some of them are actually unaccompanied minors, meaning that they actually came to Indonesia alone, without parents, without guardians, without adult family member. Can you imagine individuals under 18 years old traveling from their country of origin to Indonesia and transiting in different other countries before they finally arrive in Indonesia? And this is also the case with the Rohingya boat disembarkation that we have had last year. And also we have another one this year in June 2021, which I will talk a little bit about that more in my next slide. So this 13,000, more than 13,000 refugees and asylum seekers, where do they live in Indonesia? As you can see on your screen, because Indonesia is quite large, there are so many different islands, and the refugees, they live in different islands, different cities, as you can see. But the biggest number, they live in what we call it Greater Jakarta area or Jabodetabek. There is slightly more than 7,000 individuals living in Jabodetabek, but we also have a quite big number in Medan, around 1,900. We have 1,700 in Makassar, and others like in Pekanbaru, Tanjung Pinang, Kupang, and of course in Undip hometown, which is Semarang, we have around 7 to 8 individuals also being accommodated by IOM in Semarang. This number is way less when we compare to neighboring Malaysia or Thailand. In Malaysia, they have even 10 times more refugees, more than 150,000 refugees in Malaysia. In Thailand, there are more than 100,000 as well. So when it comes to number, Indonesia has less number of refugees and asylum seekers compared to the other big ASEAN countries. Now, despite that number is quite low compared to other neighboring countries, sorry, I could ask anyone to mute their screen. Okay. So despite that low number compared to neighboring countries, but in Indonesia, there are 49 countries of origin where the asylum seekers and refugees are originally from, as you can see on the screen. But the majority, they are coming from Afghanistan, and most of the Afghan refugees and asylum seekers, they belong to the minority groups They are Hazaras and they are Muslim Shia, and because of their racial identity and religious identity, they are being singled out by the militant group belong to the majority, such as the Taliban. We also have Somalia, we have Iraq, we have Myanmar. Most of the Myanmarese refugees and asylum seekers in Indonesia are the Rohingyas, but we also have other Myanmarese asylum seekers and refugees coming from different ethnic and religious backgrounds in Myanmar as well. So we have the Sudanese, the Sri Lankans, Yemen, Palestinians are also here, and many other countries, as you can see from the list. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the legal framework. I think everyone would agree when it comes to the right to seek asylum, it is very much acknowledged, enforced, or regulated under the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And in Indonesian context, our constitutional law or Undang-Undang Dasar 1945, it also recognizes the right to seek asylum. And in Indonesian context as well, we have Human Rights Act number 39, 1999, that also recognizes the right to seek asylum. And again, in the regional context, ASEAN, we have at least two different declarations that I really want to share here that also recognizing right to seek asylum, that include the ASEAN Declaration on Human Rights, under the Principle 16 in particular. And just recently, ASEAN also issued another declaration on the rights of the children in the context of migration that further acknowledges that victims of human trafficking can be also asylum seekers, refugees, and IDPs. So I think when it comes to regional context, I think it's quite clear that ASEAN countries actually have commitment to protect asylum seekers and refugees in ASEAN. But I think when it comes to the translation or how those declarations are being translated into action, I think one country to another country is very much different. And one principle under the international refugee law that is very, very important, I think if you can only remember one thing from my presentation, just this one, non-refoulement principle. It is the prohibition basically for all countries to return asylum seekers and refugees back to their country of origin where they will be at risk of persecution. And it is considered as international customary law. Even some scholars argue that it already raised a status of jus cogens. But in any case, non-refoulement also applies in the context in Southeast Asia, despite that many Southeast Asian countries not a state party to the 1951 convention. Now, again, still in the context of Indonesia, even though Indonesia is not a state party to the 1951 convention, but we have a national legal framework that is the Presidential Regulation number 125/2016. It was enacted in December 2016, and it has the same definition of who is refugee, exactly the same with the Article 1A of the 1951 Convention, which we are very grateful because meaning that the international standard or international definition of refugees is being applied and enforced in Indonesia. So under the presidential regulation, there is this coordinating Ministry of Politics, Legal and Security Affairs that has a task force, the National Refugee Task Force, under this coordinating ministry that is taking the lead in coordinating with other government as well as international organizations such as UNHCR and IOM in handling the refugees. As you can see also on your screen, it defines or it mandates different government agencies different function when it comes to the handling of the refugees. When it comes to the search and rescue, it's Basarnas. And in addition to Basarnas, sometimes they also will get assistance from the military, the water police, and also ministry in charge of transportation. I think we have seen this when it comes to boat disembarkations, because only these agencies who have the vehicles or the infrastructure to do the search and rescue. And when it comes to shelter, the presidential regulation also mentions the local government or the PEMDA has the authority to to decide and provide shelter for the refugees and asylum seekers. When it comes to the security, is police and or Polri, which makes sense. And then the supervision is the immigration detention center. So just to give you an update, so we had a national coordination meeting with the National Refugee Task Force in June in Bali. I personally also participated, and I think there was a consensus among the government and international organizations to revise or amend the presidential regulation number 125. So we are hoping that we are going to have even much better presidential regulation that are more human rights sensitive, putting more rights-based approach in different articles when it comes to handling the refugee situation in Indonesia. Now, so then how then asylum seekers being registered and then their cases are being processed, especially in countries like Indonesia that we have no national asylum system. So I think these next slides will give you an overview how UNHCR is conducting individual case processing in Indonesia, and to the same or to the similar situation also in countries like Malaysia and Thailand. First of all, just wanted to show you the new arrivals trend within the last 5 years. So as you can see in Indonesian context, there has been actually decrease when it comes to arrivals of asylum seekers, as you can see from 2016 to 2020. Obviously, 2020 was because of the global pandemic, where many countries, including Indonesia, closed the borders or limited number of foreign visitors to Indonesia. That actually has an impact of the total population of refugees in Indonesia became stable, as you can see from your screen. So in Indonesia, we have always around 14,000-ish refugees, 13,000-ish, and now 13,500. So we are expecting the trend will continue this year and even next year as well, simply because I think, especially in the Indonesian context, the situation of COVID-19 is still not getting better. So I think that would definitely prevent people as well to enter Indonesia, including those people who want to seek asylum in Indonesia. When it comes to individual case processing, after the registration, UNHCR will then schedule the asylum seekers to have their refugee status determination interviews. We have the new strategy when it comes to RSD. So we don't RSD everyone now. So we do prioritize RSD. We do RSD for refugees who have good prospects for being resettled to the third country, or asylum seekers who have around 50% chance of being recognized. Because when it comes to RSD, it really takes a lot of resources, time, and human resources. So many UNHCR offices, not only in Indonesia, we are more being strategic now when we are conducting refugee status determination. Under the individual case processing, we also are trying to identify vulnerable cases. Even during the registration, we are asking the asylum seekers not only why they left their country, but any indications that they may have vulnerable profile that include people who may have suffered SGBV, sexual gender-based violence, in their home country or during their travel or when they are in Indonesia. Or some people actually have profiles that also could be considered vulnerable, especially in the Indonesian context, including people who belong to different sexual orientation and gender identity, for instance. So we try to get this information as early as possible, because then it will help us to identify appropriate intervention and assistance for them while they are in Indonesia. And on the bottom, you will see increased access to comprehensive solutions, including resettlement. This is something that I will also elaborate more in my next slides, because in under the traditional durable solutions, UNHCR usually try to assist refugees to find whether it is safe enough to go back to their country and whether it is possible to locally integrate in the country of asylum, and whether it is feasible for them to be resettled to the third country. But unfortunately, it's been fortunately and unfortunately, it's been shifted now because we cannot really rely on that three durable solutions, traditional durable solutions that I mentioned, simply because first, no countries where the refugees are originally from are safe enough. Some countries are not safe enough up until now for the refugees to go home. And in the context of local integration, countries like Indonesia, for instance, or Malaysia, it's still not possible for the refugees to locally integrate because there is no legal framework to accommodate them. And also these countries, including Indonesia, are not state parties to the 1951 Convention. And when it comes to resettlement, the quota has been reduced significantly over the years. And I will just tell you why is that. Before we going there, I just wanted to show you, this is the documentations that UNHCR is issuing for both asylum seekers and refugees. For those whose status still asylum seekers, they will receive the under consideration letter, as you can see on your right side. It's like a paper base, like a A4 size. It will contain the picture of the certificate holder. It will contain basic biodata, name, UNHCR case number, place and date of birth, country of origin, and also the expiry date of this document. And usually the asylum seekers certificate like this or under consideration letter document like this, it has short expiry date compared to the UNHCR ID card that you can see on your left side. It's a card. It's like your ID card or your KTP in Indonesia that has different security features, because we hope that this is going to be very difficult to be to people make fake ID cards. It has the QR code, that will be easier for everyone, including the government officials, if they want to verify whether this card is authentic or not, and whether these individuals are registered with UNHCR Indonesia or not. And how they can verify that, we are developing this mobile application. You even can install this on your mobile phone, whether you are iPhone users or Android phone users. It's very easy. So it has that function to scan the QR code behind that UNHCR ID card. So then you can know for sure whether the card is authentic or not. Now let's go to how then refugees in Indonesia fulfill their basic needs, especially in Indonesian context, where the refugees are not allowed to work, or they don't have equal opportunity to have access to livelihood. So more than 13,400 that I mentioned earlier, around 8,000 of them, they are under IOM care. IOM is another UN agency that actually helps many refugees in Indonesia by providing them shelters, health coverage, and also monthly stipend, and also access to different other assistance programs that they have. But out of 13,400, 8,000 are under IOM care, but the rest, around 7,000 of them, they are not receiving any assistance from anyone. UNHCR is helping hundreds of them, especially those who belong to vulnerable groups. For instance, the unaccompanied minors, and also the female without effective male support. But most of the refugees who live independently, they actually receiving support mostly from their family members, whether their family members already in the resettled countries like in Australia, Canada, US, and different European countries, and they send the money every month through the MoneyGram as well as the Western Union. But then during the pandemic, of course, this global pandemic really affected everyone, not only in Indonesia, but also in other countries, meaning that even that regular money transfer that usually the refugees receive, some of the refugees receive, is no longer the case. So this really affects everyone, like all the refugees in Indonesia, especially who is not receiving any assistance from anyone. How then they survive in Indonesia? So because of that, UNHCR was exploring different possibilities, reaching out to different donor countries. And during the pandemic, UNHCR also then providing the refugees what we call it COVID-19 relief, although it's not every month, it's not even every 2 months or every 3 months. I think it's around 3 or 4 times a year. But we hope that at least with that relief, it could ease the burden of the refugees who live independently to survive. And I think this only shows how important it is in countries like Indonesia for the refugees to be allowed to have access to livelihood. So then we can help the refugees for them to help themselves. But we will talk a little bit more about this later. And I really also want to talk when it comes to the access to COVID-19 vaccines. In Indonesia, refugees in Aceh, in Pekanbaru, and in Kupang, they already have access to COVID-19 vaccines. Just last weekend in Kupang, the refugees received the second dose of COVID-19 vaccines. And we hope that this inclusive approach also applies to other locations in Indonesia, including in Greater Jakarta area. As you heard previously, that we have the biggest number of refugees living in Greater Jakarta area. So the advocacy is ongoing. We hope that Jakarta will follow the steps of Kupang, Pekanbaru, and Aceh. I would like also to highlight this important issue with all the limitations to their basic rights, the uncertainty when they will be resettled to the third country, and no access to the livelihood. This really negatively affects the refugees' mental health. And we are really sad to share you this, but I think it's very important information also for you to know that there is increased incidence when it comes to attempted suicide and also completed suicide. As you can see in 2021, so far, we have 1 attempted suicide case, and 2021 is not even over. And in 2020, we had 2 attempted suicide cases. And while you can see for the completed suicide cases, in 2021, we already have 2 cases. While in 2020, we had 4 cases. It's really sad reality and trend, and how we try to address this issue. UNHCR, IOM, and our partner Church World Service, we initiated or formed this task force on refugee mental health that we meet regularly, trying to discuss different individual cases that needs urgent attention and intervention. And of course, we are also have been promoting mental health and well-being, the importance of this to the refugees, that we hope that this could also prevent suicide cases, and how the refugees also will be able to access psychosocial supports provided by UNHCR, IOM, and our partners. And we hope that the trend will discontinue. And we are yet to actually know the positive impact of this task force and the promotion of mental health and well-being yet, but maybe by end of this year we will know much better about this. Now, this actually related to what we discussed earlier. So in UNHCR, we are trying to be as innovative as possible, trying to respond to the global context, the regional context. And I think when it comes to durable solutions, as we previously mentioned, that it's still not possible or feasible to everyone. There has been decreased quota significantly when it comes to resettlement. So then how then UNHCR is responding to that? So instead of durable solutions, now we are calling it as comprehensive solutions, because it provides more comprehensive solution that could be potential solutions to address the plight of refugees in Indonesia. Now, just trying to give you more idea about resettlement. It is one of the durable solutions. And it really depends on the availability provided by the resettlement countries, and also the resettlement countries usually they impose the criteria of what refugees that they want to take or admit to their territory. Sometimes that the criteria could be the profile of the refugees, sometimes also could be the nationality of the refugees, and sometimes even are more specific on the ethnic background and even religious backgrounds. That our concern is this policy sometimes could actually be considered as discriminatory. And this is the reason why UNHCR is trying to sensitize this issue and trying to make these resettlement countries to understand that if you want to actually take refugees from everyone, that you need to have a more inclusive criteria, not to actually exclude refugees just simply because of their ethnic background, nationality background, or religious background. So because it's very limited when it comes to resettlement, then UNHCR, we are prioritized. We do the prioritized resettlement, meaning that based on their profile that we identified at the early stage, so we would know actually which case that can be potentially submitted to resettlement countries for resettlement. And how we do that, we do intensive counseling, reaching out to the community, talking to the refugees themselves directly or through their refugee representatives. And even now, we also added another vulnerability criteria in addition to medical condition, for instance, or profile. But also now the length of stay in Indonesia is also now considered as vulnerability, meaning that if the refugees have been living in Indonesia more than 5 years, so we also will look into the case more, and then trying to submit the case to the resettlement countries for resettlement. Now, this is maybe also very much relevant to Southeast Asian context or Asia context in general. How many refugee cases being submitted to the resettlement countries in different countries in Southeast Asia and in India? We also included India. So as you can see on your screen, this is what happened in 2019. So Indonesia actually submitted quite big percentage of refugees for resettlement compared to India, Thailand, and Malaysia. So we are around 5.56% of refugee population in Indonesia were being submitted for resettlement in 2019. And you can definitely see how contrast with India, that only less than 1%. Also in Thailand and in Malaysia is only 1.4%. Of course, despite that, this is considered as good, but it's still not enough because we still more resettlement spaces for refugees in Indonesia as well as in the other Asian countries. And this is what happened in 2020, despite the COVID-19 pandemic. Indonesia operation or UNHCR Indonesia managed to submit 4.4% out of total refugee population in Indonesia. In compared to what happened in India, Thailand, and Malaysia, they all are under 1%. Again, whether this is considered good, but there should have been more spaces when it comes to resettlement. Now, where the countries that UNHCR is submitting refugee cases to, as you can see, the big 5 countries in the Indonesian context from 2018 to 2021. Canada is the largest country when it comes to taking refugees from Indonesia, followed by the US, New Zealand, Australia, and the UK. But outside these 5 countries, there are also other different countries as well that take small number of refugees, but still we are very grateful that they do that. There are countries like New Zealand, for instance. Well, New Zealand is here, but there are different countries in European Union, for instance, that also takes refugees. Scandinavian countries, for instance, that takes many medical cases from Indonesia. Now, that's when it comes to submission. So those cases who were submitted for resettlement, not necessarily that they were being accepted by the countries, not necessarily that they will be deported to those countries. So as you can see, this is the number of refugees deported from Indonesia to Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and USA. As you can see, USA was actually the second biggest country when it comes to resettlement submission. But at the end, there are more refugees departing to the US compared to Canada. That was actually the largest country in the context of Indonesia when it comes to resettlement submission. Now, to anticipate that decreased number of resettlement, so then UNHCR is doing now or exploring what we call it complementary pathways to a third country. So it's not using the resettlement scheme that I previously discussed, but we are exploring different schemes that include private sponsorship, scholarship, family reunification, and also labor mobility that I will talk a little bit more later. Many refugees have benefited from this different scheme, and we hope that we are going to expand more in the near future, meaning that there will be more refugees who will be able to go to the third country under the private sponsorship, scholarship, family reunification, as well as the labor mobility. So this year, UNHCR Indonesia is successfully have this case, one refugee case departed to Lithuania to pursue her higher education, which is actually the first case even in the Southeast Asian context. That this particular refugee, that she got the scholarship from this Lithuanian university. So then she departed from Indonesia to Lithuania to continue her higher education in Lithuania. And 2 more refugees in Indonesia are now waiting also to depart to Lithuania. And we hope that there will be even more refugees, not only to Lithuania, but perhaps also to other countries. We have seen different countries, different big schools, colleges actually have scholarship for refugees around the world. And we hope that this number will just increase in the years to come. Now, this is something that we hope that UNHCR in the regional context will be able to expand for the refugees to be able to go to the third country under the labor mobility scheme. So we are collaborating with an organization called Talent Beyond Boundaries, that we hope that some refugees with special skills or unique skills, and their skills can be utilized by private sectors in countries outside Indonesia, for them to be able to go to that country and to work in that country. So we have this pilot program with Australia, and we hope that some refugees will be able to go to Australia under this scheme. And beyond Australia, we also hope that there will be similar initiatives happen in Canada and in the UK. And this year, actually, we're very happy. One refugee will be traveling to Qatar because the refugee managed to secure unemployment in Qatar, and he will be departing actually on the 27th of July, which is today, to Qatar, and UNHCR was helping him to get the exit permit only from the Directorate General of Immigration. So we are happy that this is the first case, and we hope there will be more cases as well in the future. Now let's talk a little bit about refugee empowerment in Indonesia. This is one of the commitments mentioned by the government of Indonesia during the Global Refugee Forum. Before the Global Refugee Forum, there is another platform that is called Global Compact on Refugees, which many of you probably already aware that one of the goals is to ease pressure on host countries and also enhance refugee self-reliance. So then this was then being followed up in the Global Refugee Forum, where countries around the world, including private sectors, NGOs, organizations, attended, participated in this forum, and made pledges what they would do to help and protect the refugees. And at that time, Indonesian delegation was headed by the Commission 1 of DPR, the Parliament House, that actually pledged that Indonesia will do refugee empowerment program. And what does it mean? Refugee empowerment program in Indonesia means that the refugees will be allowed to acquire new skills, and that new skills will then be utilized by private sector in Indonesia, meaning that refugees will have access to livelihood in Indonesia. But of course, there are terms and conditions applied to that pledge or commitment, and we are now still waiting for the Ministry of Manpower to issue some kind of like a policy or circular letter that will be, or that will serve as a legal basis for private sectors to recruit refugees to work and have their skills utilized by them. And just also wanted to give you an idea. So we are very grateful. There are many different research projects conducted by CSOs, NGOs in Indonesia. And one of them is Sandia Institute that collected information about the skills and professions the refugees had prior to their arrival in Indonesia. And as you can see, most refugees, they were traders or worked in the agriculture. Some were builders, tailors, and some were also drivers. This is very important again, because the government, they also try to map the skills that the refugees have and see how that skills can actually be useful in the context of Indonesia. When it comes to education, many refugees in Indonesia actually completed their secondary level, around 40%. 25% have primary level education, and 21% have no education. And this is something that is very important, but also very useful for humanitarian organizations, advocacy-based organizations in Indonesia to advocate more when it comes to access to education in Indonesia. And in Indonesia, refugees are allowed to go to public schools only until secondary level. So there is still no national policy when it comes to higher education for the refugees to be allowed to go to colleges in Indonesia. So this is something that we are continuing advocating, and hopefully there will be a positive result in the coming months regarding this, because we have seen so many universities in Indonesia are actually wanting to open their doors for the refugees to be able to study in their respective university. Language skills, I think you have seen before, there are 49 countries of origin. That means the refugees in Indonesia speak so many different languages that not necessarily Indonesians understand and could potentially also be useful for Indonesia as well. We have large numbers speaking Farsi or Dari, which makes sense because the majority of refugees in Indonesia are from Afghanistan. And the English language skill also is quite high among the refugee population. We have Arabic, we have Somali, and even because of the many have been living in Indonesia, many actually speak very fluently Bahasa Indonesia as well. Now, this is just more elaboration on the access to livelihood. So UNHCR, we have initiative with our sister agency, ILO. So we initiated this entrepreneurship training since 2018 that basically allows the refugees and Indonesian entrepreneurs to be in the same platform to discuss, brainstorm about business ideas, and to get lecturers and presentations from different successful businessmen and businesswomen in Indonesia. And at the end of the program, the successful group will then receive a small grant that can be used to start their business in Indonesia. So we hope that this ILO UNHCR entrepreneurship program will continue and even will expand more in the future. And in addition to that, UNHCR also is conducting different vocational trainings that includes organic farming, tailoring, and culinary and food, and also the fashion and design. And it's not necessarily conducted by UNHCR, but also by our partners and even private sectors. And we hope that there will be more allies regarding to this, and more partners will be able to provide different trainings to our refugees in Indonesia. So what we are hoping with this activities, we hope that of course the refugees will be able to take care of themselves, because I think that's the most sustainable solution for the refugees around the world. As much as probably some people will be very happy to receive assistance, but I think many refugees also will be even happier when they are allowed to contribute to the country of asylum where they are living in, because they have the skills, they have the talents that can be utilized and useful for Indonesian society. So this is the reason why we want the refugees to be included, or there is an inclusion when it comes to access to livelihood in Indonesia. And our approach has been that our livelihood activities should also be benefit for the Indonesian society, because this will then promoting also the coexistence between the refugees as well as the host communities. Now, this was actually mentioned before as well, and many refugees in Indonesia, especially those under IOM care, they receive direct assistance. But I think we also have seen that direct assistance is not really sustainable, and I think it's also not good for everyone to be dependent to direct assistance. I think everyone who wishes to live with dignity is actually wanting to contribute, and how they are contributing is basically by giving them access to livelihood. And what we are doing in Indonesia is that, and have been telling the government, by allowing the refugees to have access to the livelihood, it also reduces their mental health issues. As you can see before, some refugees who committed suicide or attempted to commit suicide, many were actually young men. Many were actually in the productive working age. So can you imagine if then they were allowed to actually have access to the livelihood? This will actually reduce the stress or the depression that they may have while living in Indonesia or waiting for the resettlement to happen in Indonesia. And we also hope that by allowing refugees to be very productive and being a productive member of the society, this will also increase chances for them to be resettled. I think the resettlement countries would be very happy when they actually take refugees from Indonesia, who will then be able to immediately locally integrate in their country, and to be able also to immediately contribute to their country. So this is also another reason that we have been providing to the government. Hopefully for the national policy will be in favor of these initiatives. Now, this is something that may be quite relevant to the theme that Undip asked me to link what UNHCR is doing, and with the theme of the summer school toward the digitalization of law in Indonesia. So just to share with you that I think similar to other countries in Southeast Asia, UNHCR documents are not widely recognized in lieu of passport, visa, residency, meaning that the refugees will have difficulties in accessing even to register their SIM card number, because UNHCR card number is not on the system. So unless that you have the KTP or you have the passport, visa, you will not be able to register your SIM card. So many refugees then eventually were getting help from their Indonesian friends to get their SIM card. But of course, this is not ideal. We hope that there will be digital inclusion when it comes to refugees. They should be able to register their SIM card, meaning that if they have the SIM card registered under their name, it will be easier for them as well to access digital wallets that we have many in Indonesia, the GoPay, the OVO, the Link, many that the refugees are still having difficulties if they really want to be registered under their own name. And of course, when it comes to banking services, refugees is still not allowed to, but mostly also because UNHCR card is not really recognized as a document that can replace passport, visa, kitas, kitab, and all that. So just to understand a little bit more about the situation, UNHCR is collaborating with the CSO to conduct digital inclusion research project. We are trying to actually map the existing legal framework, the legal obstacles that really prevent the refugees to access all these things. But we also hope that we can see some best practices that may happen outside the capital, because some areas in Indonesia, they are more progressive when it comes to refugee protection, and also in the spirit of spatial autonomy in different locations. We hope that maybe this will allow certain provinces, regencies, or cities to have a different policy when it comes to inclusion, digital inclusion of refugees. But we do not know yet, because we are yet to get the result from this project. But this will be very interesting when the research project is completed. And last few slides, I would like to talk a little bit about the potential disembarkations and what we have learned from the previous disembarkations. As you all aware, in 2020, we had 2 boat disembarkations. Almost 400 Rohingya refugees disembarked in Aceh. And this year, in June, we also had 1 disembarkation, 81 refugees disembarked in East Aceh. So what UNHCR was doing, that we have different platforms at the national level, at the provincial level, and also at the regional level in Southeast Asia with other UNHCR offices, also with the other NGOs, that we wanted to be prepared when it comes to responding to the potential disembarkations in the future. And in addition to that, that when it comes to the Aceh context, they are also quite human rights sensitive when it comes to protecting the refugees. And we want this to be actually adopted into local bylaw, or in Aceh, because it's the only Sharia-based province, they have the bylaw called Kanun. So UNHCR is also now involving with Banda Aceh partners, legal partners, to draft the Kanun that is human rights sensitive, that is refugee sensitive, and we hope that by end of this year we will also have that draft Kanun that can be enforced in Aceh when it comes to handling refugee situation in Aceh, because what is happening now mostly is kind of like on ad hoc basis. So when the refugees disembark, we help them, we provide assistance, and so on and so forth. But we want this to be a bit more structured, I guess. So I think to be able to do that, we need to have the bylaw or the provincial legal framework that allows everyone to do that in a more systematic and structural way. Now, I will stop my presentation by sharing you an inspiration or inspirative story, hopefully. Not really sure if you know who this lady is. So this lady is a doctor, medical doctor. She is a humanitarian worker, health worker, and most of all, she's a refugee. She's one of those 1.4 million Afghan refugees who is now in Pakistan. And she's a medical doctor, obviously. And Pakistan, similar to Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, not a state party to the 1951 convention, but there are so many best practices happen in Pakistan, meaning that refugees, for instance, they have access to study from kindergarten level to the PhD if they want. And this doctor named Salima Rehman, she actually obtained her medical degree from Pakistani University. And during the the COVID-19 pandemic response in Pakistan. She is still one of those frontliners in the health field that helping everyone in Pakistan dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic in the country. So can you imagine if countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand give those access or more access of basic rights to the refugees in these countries? So we will definitely have more Dr. Salima Rihman in Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. And this is something that we are aspire, but this is something also that we hope that will happen in the future, inshallah. So that was all. Thank you so much, Dr. Adia. Happy to respond to any questions anyone has.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Isa, for the clear explanation on refugee and the protection in Indonesia, and also some kind of sample that as like the doctor that give inspiration to people, especially in Indonesia and also maybe in other countries, to give more opportunity to the refugees to have and to be able to enjoy their rights. Okay, I think we have some questions here. Is there anyone who wants to ask directly to Mr. Isa? You may raise your hand. Anyone, guys? Okay, while waiting, I will read questions from the chat room. The first question is from Shaswan from the National University of Malaysia. As we know that the definition of the refugee has been stated in the 1951 Convention. However, does the climate refugees is included to this definition, and how the UNHCR deals with the climate refugees? That's the first question. And the second from Shaswan is, if the refugee commit the crime in the country that he or she seek the protection, does it will affect his refugee status? The time is yours, Mr. Isa.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Adi, and thank you to Shaswan for the questions. So the first one is that I know that there has been lots of discussion at the global level when it comes to climate change and refugee status, and whether someone who fled their country because of environmental reason could be qualified under the 1951 Convention. I understand that there has been no consensus when it comes to that. I think when you look into the 1951 Convention, it's still very difficult to somehow stretch that or link that to the climate change reason, because as you know, in the 1951 Convention, it contained only 5 convention grounds. But what I can tell you is that usually when it comes to climate change or environmental refugees, you also can actually look who are the victims or the most suffered from the climate change or environmental issues in their countries. It's always usually minority groups, the underprivileged society, then of course compared to the privileged ones and not or the majority groups, they are not probably getting the same effect, meaning that even if they're refuge, even if someone fled their country seeking asylum based on this reason, we will also look into that possibility, meaning that climate change could be one of them, but to be able to be qualified under refugee status, we will probably trying to link that to one of the convention grounds. If they are minorities, is it because of their ethnic background? Is it because their religious identity, meaning that they are not getting the same treatment or help or assistance from their own government to overcome the challenges, issues that they are facing as a result of environmental issues in their country? So that's one question. I'm sure that probably you will have follow-up questions on that, but let me just try to answer the second question of yours. When it comes to the refugee who commits crime in the country, does it affect his refugee status? So first of all, refugees or asylum seekers, they are not above the law. meaning that when they are in conflict with the domestic laws of the country where they are currently living in, so they should be able to be prosecuted as per the law, uh, equally to other citizens of that country or foreigners who live in that country. I think this is very important to understand. Refugees are not above the law. But how then the crimes that they committed could actually eventually be considered or trigger cancellation or revocation of refugee status is not automatically. Basically, UNHCR perspective has been that refugees, after they serve their sentence, then they will actually be go back to, or they will be go back to their refugee status. They will be living as refugees in that country, because what they did in the country of asylum, let's say in Indonesia or Malaysia, it actually does not have any connection why they fled their country of origin. Meaning that if they are being forced return to their country of origin, their physical liberty could still be at risk. But of course, under the 1951 Convention, there are also certain crimes, usually international crimes under the Article 1F in particular, that somehow can exclude someone from refugee status. And they are, the the war crime, crimes against humanity, genocide, and so on and so forth, including serious non-political crimes. And at least in Indonesian context, many refugees who are in conflict with domestic law, not really violating or committing international crime, meaning that there is no trigger for them for their status to be revoked or canceled. But of course, this perspective always kind of like creates some tension with the government. Perhaps this is similar in Malaysia, but we just continue the discussion with the government of Indonesia, trying to make them understand our position and any forced return for these refugees who violated Indonesian law because of stealing, for instance, that could amount to non-refoulement principle being violated as well. And of course, the government doesn't want to be labeled as a country who violates a non-refoulement principle. So I hope that answered a little bit of your questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Isa. Shazwan, do you have any comment or respond to the answer? Okay, no comment. Okay, thank you, Shazwan. Then next we move to the next question from Athia Rahim Mahendrarto from uh, University Ponegoro. I'd like to ask you a couple of questions. I am very interested in pursuing a career in the United Nations in the future. Is there any advice or tips you can give as someone who has achieved a lot and is currently the representative of UNHCR Indonesia? What are the requirements? And do we have to take international law as our focus study? Thank you for your time and presentation. I think it was very inspiring, and what you're doing is amazing by making a difference.
Okay, thank you
The
so much.
time is yours.
Thank you so much, Atia, for the question and for your kind words as well. I don't really have the good answer for this. I think everyone has their own circumstances. But in my case, it's always about passion and luck, how I am what I am today. And I think all of you who are still students, probably you are still trying to figuring out what is your passion, what do you want to do after you finish your law school or whatever major that you are in. But at least in my case is that I always wanted to be a humanitarian worker, although I went to a law school, and I thought that it was not really possible. I thought it was only, medical background, health background, that can work in humanitarian organization. But UNHCR, as any other UN agencies or other NGOs, CSOs on humanitarian field, is very multidisciplinary, meaning that there are always positions that are based whether you are on social science background or whether you are on, science, engineering, medical background. So there's always a place for everyone because it's a huge organization. And there are many different expertise that require for organization like UNHCR to be able to implement our mandate in countries like Indonesia. So I think that was my question, and I think yes, definitely, studying international law could help. I think it's good to actually know the international legal framework, the international human rights law, refugee law, and international humanitarian law, because they are all complementing each other. They are linked to each other, So I think to have basic idea and knowledge about those fields of law will definitely be very, very helpful if you want to pursue career in UN agencies or UNHCR in particular. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ista. Next question. We still have two more questions. It's from Nick from Queen Mary University. Good day, Mr. Issa. My question is regarding the capacity of the country to take care of the refugee. Does the UNHCR will help a country who accept the refugee? How if there is a conflict between the refugee and the local people? Since we know that the refugee will not only bring their family or relatives, they also bring their culture, habit, and so on. The time is yours, Mr. Issa.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I think there are at least two ways that how then the refugees will be resettled, right? Whether they are in Indonesia before, then they will be resettled from Indonesia, but they are also refugees who are traveling directly to those countries. I think what we have seen in Europe and in North America and all that, at least for refugees that UNHCR is resettling from countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand. So I think when we submit their cases to resettlement countries, and then they have been accepted by these resettlement countries and waiting for their departure to the resettlement countries. So then there are different info sessions provided by the resettlement country, assisted by IOM and UNHCR, that include the familiarity with the law, with the custom, with the culture of the country that they are going to, and to live as refugees will then eventually they will be naturalized as a citizen of those countries. So this is one of the efforts taken by UNHCR, IOM. So then the refugees will be able to adapt and also somehow locally integrate successfully in their new country. But I think for those refugees who go directly to those countries, and I think we have seen in the media how there are issues when it comes to that and whether UNHCR is helping that country or not. I think mostly the government themselves and also the NGOs and CSOs in that country in particular that are trying to help the refugees for their smooth transition and local integration in that country. I think definitely learning the new language would definitely be very helpful. Cultural lesson and sensitize them about the law regime applies in that country. The rule of law in that country could also be very helpful for the refugees who are trying to settle down in their new country. And of course, when there is conflict, first of all, I think it is just showing that the refugees are also human beings like us, that anyone can be in conflict of domestic law. But I think also you need to also put that in perspective that when it comes to percentage, how many violation committed, for instance, by the refugees in their new countries. And I'm pretty sure that the percentage will be quite low. And unfortunately, sometimes that, the action of one kind of like portrays or stigmatize the whole community, which I think is also very dangerous, because I think when there is stigmatization, exclusion, discrimination, I think it's just making the local integration of these refugees even way harder than it is already is for them to be in a new country. And of course, the refugees, they fled war, persecution. They have all this trauma that they carry, to their new home. And this is something also need to be considered, and how perhaps some intervention when it comes to psychosocial support, for instance, need to be done, for them to be like a normal human being again before then they locally integrate to the new society that they are currently in. So I think that's my take on that question. Thank you for the question, Nick.
Okay, thank you for the answer. And the last question is from Andi Sendra from Universitas Diponegoro. He have a couple of questions. First is, so how the embassy of the refugees country encounter towards the refugees that came to our country? Are they take responsibility to with the UNHCR to their citizen? And could the stateless person propose for a citizenship to the embassy? Thank you. The time is yours, Mr. Isa.
Thank you, Andy, for the question. So in short, no. So UNHCR is not really interacting with the embassies where the refugees are originally from, because when it comes to asylum, I mean the concept of asylum is confidential, and some refugees, they have problems with their own government, for instance, meaning that we don't even share to their embassies that their citizens are seeking asylum in Indonesia, because that will be violating the confidentiality principle that we are upholding in our asylum system. But I think there will be some interaction indirectly with the embassy, especially when the asylum seekers failed in their asylum application, meaning that they may have to return to their country of origin. So how then they return to the country of origin? Usually they would need some kind of like travel document or new passport to be able for them to depart from Indonesia back to their country of origin. But even so, even when that indirect interaction or communication happen, we also do not talk at all about why these individuals seeking asylum in Indonesia. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. One more question, Mas Isa from Shaswan. He's so I think he's so interested with this team. Okay, Shaswan said that he thinks that it is well known that the obligation to accept the refugees and asylum seekers is only for the countries that ratified the 1951 convention. However, if there is any possibilities that any country that can be taken into legal action if they do not accept the refugees or asylum seekers that already came to their countries. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for the question. That would be very ideal if the state parties to the 1951 convention actually take more responsibility or host more refugees, of course. But the reality is not the case. As you have seen in my previous slide, 86% of global refugee population, they are hosted by developing countries, third world countries, or poor countries in the world. And whether then we could take these state parties accountable, yes and no. Because how it works with international law, usually what the best thing that we can do is naming and shaming. That's one of the things that we do. In any global forum, platform, we can definitely name and shame Australia, for instance, or the UK, or these developed nations that should take care of the refugees more, probably. But then that's it. And at the same time, especially in the context of Asia, as you may know, that we don't have that regional human rights mechanism like the ones in Europe, like the ones in the Americas, and the ones in Africas. So maybe in Asia, it's a bit difficult to bring or to lodge an individual complaint against an Asian country because there is no platform or mechanism. But maybe in Europe, I think those who are in Europe or those in South America or the Americas and those in Africa can actually tell us how it is in those continents, because they have human rights mechanism in that region. The America's Court of Human Rights, the European Court of Human Rights, and of course, one of the right that is recognized by the regional human rights convention in those continents is right to seek asylum. So how then, if that is not being enforced in that country, how then it can be brought to the Court of Human Rights in that region? So yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you for the comprehensive and clear explanation. Okay, I think this is the end of our session this morning, Mr. Isa. So I think before we end the session, I would like to ask you to give closing statement, 1 or 2 minutes maybe.
Oh wow, I did not prepare for the closing remark, but no, I mean, thank you once again. I think it is a pleasure, but also great opportunity, not for me but for UNHCR to be given this opportunity. Thanks to Undip, but also taking into consideration the participants are coming from different parts of the world, who may share the same issues, problems, concerns when it comes to how the refugees are protected or not protected in their country of origin. And I think if I could kindly ask each one of you is to continue the discussion about this issue in your school, in your country, in your community, and hopefully, at least in the context of ASEAN, I personally would like to uh, uh, well, I'm really hopeful that ASEAN could be like a good role model, I guess, when it comes to refugee protection, which is not the situation right now, but there are uh, lots of potentials in the region if you can see how dynamic the NGOs, CSOs, and human rights organizations in the region advocating for rights of the marginalized people, including the refugees. It's very inspiring, and as an ASEAN national, I want that to move forward, that we can have a better refugee-friendly region in the near future. And I think also for you who are still at schools, please consider also to join humanitarian organization after you graduate from your school, because we need more refugee advocates, to be very honest. Refugee advocates who know what humanitarian is, but also know the laws and how to make a good argument to the government and to the UN, to have better protection for marginalized group, all marginalized groups in Southeast Asia, including the refugees, asylum seekers, and stateless persons. Thank you, Dr. Adia. That was all.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Isa, for the insightful speech and also the inspiration for the fellow students to have an idea of being a humanitarian worker as their future career. Okay, I think this is the end of our session today. I would like to say thank you again to Mr. Isa Sumawijaya for the insightful speech, and also to all the fellow students and participants as your active participation. Thank you for your attention. See you this afternoon, guys. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Back to Daniel.
Thank you, Mr. Isa and Dr. Adia, for the great presentation and discussion. Dear participants, before we end the session, we would like to hold a brief photo session. So to all of the participants, would you please turn on your cameras and take position?
Come on, guys.
Okay, guess we'll take the picture now. Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3. One more. 1, 2, 3. Okay, participants, we have finally come to the end of our session. Thank you for your participation. We'll see you in the next session. Have a nice lunch break. Thank you.
Thank you, Mas Isa, Daniel, and all the participants.
Thank you.
Thank you.